I'm Jeff Sarnett, and this is Software Career Growth. Today, we're talking about what does it take to go from being a junior to a mid-level software developer. In today's video, we're going to talk about what does it take to move up from being a junior software developer to being a more intermediate one. And of course, in the future, we can talk about going from intermediate to senior, but for now, let's stick with this, shall we? So first, a little bit about sort of definitions, right? A junior software engineer or software developer is someone who's new to the field, just getting started, and isn't entirely necessarily independent. Being intermediate is the level at which you don't need a lot of mentoring or supervision, and you are able to work independently, but not quite at a level of, okay, this is the person to whom we give the hardest problems, or this is a person who's ready to mentor and teach others, or be a team lead or something like that. And so intermediate is just in the middle there, and the middle can seem a little bit awkward, but it is actually an important place. It's where a lot of work gets done. There's lots of software development tasks that are pretty routine and require someone who can work independently without it being a whole design effort that requires somebody who has 37 years of experience. So let's talk about what do you do to get there. Okay, so the first thing that I want to say is specific beats general. And that's not just a rule for a tabletop role-playing game, but also just like general stuff that I tell you is not as important as anything specific that applies to where you're working. If your company has a career progression matrix and you can see, all right, these are the things, these are the criteria that are necessary for going from a junior to an intermediate developer, you should look at those, you should follow those. You can take what I say and see how it fits into that matrix, but ultimately at the end of the day, the person who's deciding whether you move up is looking at that career matrix as opposed to looking at this video. I mean, I'd like it if they look at this video, but probably they're not. And then there is the more specific, which is not just what does it say in this graph, what does it say in this chart, what does it say in this table, but what applies specifically to you. If you're having regular one-on-one conversations with your manager and you say, listen, I'm a junior engineer and I'm interested in knowing what it takes to get to the next level, and your manager gives you very specific suggestions where they say, hey, this is what you should be doing, or this is what I'd like to see, or this is what it takes, choose those. Right? This is the person who's going to decide whether you're up for promotion at some period. And if they're telling you very specifically this is what you need to do, that's more valuable than anything else. And so that's really the first tip, that if the company has a progression matrix, look at it, have a discussion with your manager to talk to them about how do I get there, what am I missing from this matrix. If they don't, just jump straight to that discussion, have the conversation with the manager, ask them, and get some specific answers. Ideally, they have some. They might not have them on the spot. They might need to go back and think about it, and that's okay. But don't let this just linger for too long, because it's something that you actually need if you want to get where you want to go. So the next thing is there's no substitute for time. Right? Time is important in two ways. The first way is that somebody who's just been hired, it's their first job, they've only been working in software for 3 months, is probably not ready to be an intermediate developer because they just don't have enough exposure to the things, they haven't done enough of the work to actually realistically call themselves an intermediate in software development. But it's also about demonstrating the skills, and demonstrating the skills is done over a period of time, right? If it's important to demonstrate design exercises, you probably don't get quite as many of those in the first few weeks because you're onboarding, and just over time you'll get opportunity to do it. But when I'm looking at someone and evaluating how are they doing, I'm looking at how are they doing consistently. Right? Everybody has good and bad days, and it's important not to sort of overanalyze the good and the bad days. It's more important to see how is somebody doing consistently on average. That's what makes a difference, and so it just takes time. That you might be a junior developer and you might be looking at, I'm checking all the boxes for being an intermediate, and yes, you can be, and if you continue to do that and you maintain that consistently, then that's a pretty good argument for why at your next performance review you should say, I'm ready, and ideally your manager sees it the same way. But there's no substitute for time. With that said, when it comes to sort of the actual skills, I mentioned off the top, it's partly about this idea of being independent. It means that you don't need quite as much mentoring. That's not to say there's never any mentoring, and you should be getting mentoring from people who are more senior and people who have more experience, and also from your manager. And these can go together. They can be complementary. They could be combined in one person. But you need to be getting that mentoring from somewhere. But with that said, you should be able to take tasks and complete them as long as they're not super difficult without needing a lot of assistance. And this requires mastery of a lot of different elements of the actual software development process, right? So this may mean taking a ticket from the backlog and refining it a little bit, asking the questions that are necessary to understand exactly what needs to be done. It's implementing the actual code. It's devising good tests for the code that you write, and possibly code reviews, responding well to those. All those things are sort of basic level mastery kind of stuff that says, okay, I need to get this right to be effective in my job. Right? And in terms of the software stack that you're working with, it means you're familiar with the programming language. You might have joined as a junior at a company where they use a programming language you've never written before. I don't know, it's Rust or Go or something like that. And in school, you learn Python. That's fine, but to get to intermediate, you're going to have at least a good level of mastery of whatever languages and frameworks you're writing in, and also mastering things like code reviews. How do you give a good code review? That's actually a subject for a different video, which I have been planning to shoot, but haven't actually designed the content for yet. But how do you do a good code review, right? How do you explain the things that you observe and the questions that you ask? These are challenging, right? Writing good documentation is a part of it. It doesn't have to be a novel. In fact, no one's going to read a novel, but writing an explanation of what is the functionality of the thing that you wrote is an important part of method mastery in terms of being an expert in what you're doing. And if you do this, that's going to help quite a lot in terms of progressing to being intermediate. The next thing is about showing an understanding of the wider problem space. Now, you don't have to be a business analyst and tell the company we should be focusing on this or focusing on that. But when you're given a task, you need to have some understanding of the context of it. What is the purpose? What is the goal that we're trying to accomplish? For a junior person, it's enough. You're assigned a ticket. You just implement the ticket. You don't ask too many questions, and you say, "Yep, did what I was told, sir. Yes, sir," and that will suffice. But as an intermediate, there's an expectation that you have some understanding of where does this fit into the puzzle of what we're doing as a whole. So if the whole thing that we're doing is based around, customs declarations, so you don't have to fill in these forms and you're asked to write something that converts from one format to another, you need to have some understanding of what is the goal of this process, because it will really help you in understanding not only why you're doing this, but how to do this in an efficient way, because, that leads us to the next point. And the next point is about alternatives. As a junior person, it's more difficult to sort of know what are the possible routes to getting to the answer, and you may have learned in school, okay, this is what I learned about algorithms, and you may have some previous experience working with certain algorithms, and you say, all right, this is what I know, so this is what I'm going to use. But as an intermediate person, I am expecting that this is someone who can think of some alternatives. Is there a better way to do what we're doing, or is there just a different way to do what we're doing? And I would expect from a senior being able to argue thoughtfully about which of these things is best. As an intermediate, it's okay if you don't know which is best, as long as you present them and you say, hey, could you help me to decide which of these alternatives make sense? Because it's an important part of being a software developer is using your brain, and as an intermediate person, we're counting on you to come up with alternatives, even if you're not entirely sure which is best because you don't have the big picture. But we don't want robots who just do what they're told, because that's not the best way to get excellent software at the end of the day. Right? Whatever is written down in the ticket, maybe this ticket was written by a product manager, or maybe it's based on a customer request, and you have some expertise where you say, hey, I know there's this library that does this thing that would really make this simpler, and who else would know that? So I want to see that sort of contribution. I want to see those answers that you bring to the table. The last thing that I'll say about this is that to get to the next level, obviously there needs to be some recognition from your manager. They need to see that you are doing things above your current level, and so this is something you want to be bringing up in the one-on-ones. I mentioned at the beginning that if there's a matrix or if you've asked for very specific things, but it needs to be clear to your manager, not just what you're doing, but how you're doing it. So make sure that you're communicating with them, this is what you want, and this is where you want to go. Getting promoted in software companies can be difficult. This does prompt the question about, do I have to leave? Do I have to change jobs if I want to move up in the company or in my career? That's a more difficult question. That's also a subject for a different video. The answer is sometimes yes and sometimes no, hence why it's a different video and not just something that I can answer quickly in 2 seconds here. But it is a consideration, and it is something that you should think about if you are doing all the stuff that gets you to being an intermediate level engineer and it's not being recognized, and it has been long enough. Don't expect that doing this for 3 weeks will be enough for you to get a promotion and a medal. But if it's not happening, then you do have to consider how long are you willing to wait, and at what point is it time to take the show on the road. So that's it. That's my quick advice for if you are a junior and you want to get to be an intermediate software engineer. I hope you find it helpful. And again, don't forget to like and subscribe.